With youth unemployment on the rise and worries over further negative impacts on our economy and recovery, and as a recent graduate as of December 2019, what assurances do I have as a young person entering the professional world of work that there will be enough opportunity available for me?
And what's your situation, Iman?
So I had a job offer in the advertising industry, which I was, which is what I graduated in, but it was revoked because of lockdown. And you know, they said that because of their financials for the rest of the year and the worry around coronavirus, they weren't really sure if they could keep my new employment. So I'm just a little bit concerned about if there is enough, you know, young people already don't have enough opportunity as it is in the professional space. So I'm just worried about what plan the government has to sort of bring that opportunity up for us.
And so you had a job which is now gone. Are you working at all at the moment?
Yeah, I currently work in food supply. It was my part-time job at university, and luckily I didn't hand in my notice, so I can still, luckily I could still work there.
So what, a supermarket, something like that?
Yeah,
right,
yeah, absolutely.
Right. And just out of interest, a hands up of our audience, how many of you are either out of work or have been furloughed? Right, OK. What's going to happen to young people, Steve? I mean, Boris Johnson talked about they should all have apprenticeships. A lot of people seem to be taken by surprise by that. Is that going to happen?
Yes, well, the key challenge really before is jobs. And if you look at what happened going into the pandemic, we had halved the rate of unemployment amongst the young. But the young tend to be the first to feel the impacts of a recession. Which is why, if you look at the figures now for the 18 to 24s, they're 10% of the working age population, but 18% of welfare claimants. So they tend to feel it hardest first and are often in the sectors like hospitality, tourism, where the impacts are greatest. So the strategy has been first to protect as many jobs as possible. That's why we've had the furlough scheme, which has protected over 9 million jobs at a significant cost of over £22 billion. The self-employment scheme, which has protected again, around 2.5 million jobs, a cost of £7.5 billion. Why we supported 850,000 businesses through the grant scheme, investing again £10 billion into that. So there's been very significant measures alongside all the things we've done on cash flow to support businesses as well. So there's been
what
a
about these
package of measures to protect
apprenticeships?
Jobs. Now, moving forward, you're right, you then go from that protect phase onto the next phase, which is how do we restart the economy? What are the jobs that we can then move to from those areas of the economy where jobs are being lost? So greening the economy, looking at the challenge as the first major economy to set the test of net zero by 2050. What are the jobs in there?
But just very specifically, what about Boris Johnson has pledged apprenticeships for young people? When might that happen?
We're absolutely committed to that. So the Chancellor will give a statement in July, which will be all about the next phase, talking about how we green the economy, how we respond with the infrastructure projects, because we're absolutely right, jobs, particularly for young people, is one of the key challenges before us, and that's very much what we're focused on within the Treasury at the moment.
Iona.
Well, if I could just jump in here, because I think Stephen is absolutely correct to say that young people's jobs right now need to be right at the top of the priority list, because we know that young people are the most likely to have been furloughed, to have had their wages and hours cut as a result of this crisis, and to have lost their jobs altogether. And they're also the most likely to be working in the industries that have been hardest hit by lockdown, like retail, tourism and hospitality. And there are predictions that there could be youth unemployment rising by 600,000 this year, because people who are leaving education this year are coming into a really tough jobs market, the toughest that we've ever seen. So we need specific measures. And I have to say, listening to Stephen there, I'm surprised he didn't mention more about apprenticeships and the apprenticeship levy and the fact that it has not been a success. Since it was introduced in 2017, it was meant to get more young people, particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds, into apprenticeships to give them better life chances. But what we've seen is that participation rates among those from more disadvantaged backgrounds has fallen by a third. The apprenticeships have gone more to those from privileged backgrounds. And we see within the rules that actually the apprenticeship levy can be used to send managers on courses to get MBAs. I don't think that's what the apprenticeship levy was meant for. It's meant to help young people find their feet in the world of work. So it's not necessarily even about spending more money, although there could be a case for more targeted funding. It's about spending the money well and making sure it's actually going to young people in the labour market. Katie,
you got your hand up.
Hi, I work in hospitality, so I'm currently furloughed and have been since the middle of March. I'm lucky, as in I'm 26, so I've done hospitality for quite some number of years. So I've already got experience behind me. So if somebody was more likely to keep me on rather than somebody who's kind of 17, 18 and it's their part-time job while they're studying, I don't necessarily disagree with him on. I can see the point that he's making, but I also think that for a while, university degrees have been advertised as the way to go. And studying things, like I studied music at university. I know people that have studied kind of like maths and things like that. I think younger people don't necessarily have the opportunity to go into something like a trade, which is probably more valuable. I do think there's a community of people who want to be influencers and YouTubers and things like that. I'm not saying that's everyone. Obviously, everyone is different, but I do feel like that is where people would probably find more work if they were interested in more like a trade rather than being an influencer.
Neve.
Hi, yeah. I think I dread to think what it's going to be like. I graduated last September and I've been in between waiting to start my master's and saving money for that. And it was already next to impossible for me to find a job this year. So with the pandemic and with Brexit, I dread to think what it's going to be like for those graduating this year. For me, the jobs that I did find were minimum wage. They didn't cover your living expenses. You'd have to top that up with benefits. There's unpaid internships, completely unpaid. Nothing's paid. They're given disproportionately to privileged people. And I know Steve and Barclay reeled off all these stats about young people and where they were, working in hospitality. So that really worries me because you know these things, but there wasn't a pandemic before. So young people are suddenly on your radar.
Kirsty.
So I was just wondering, this is kind of mainly aimed at Steve, because I feel like particularly it's been raised by the pandemic, there's more opportunities for people to work online, and with everything going on at the moment, I feel like self-employment should actually be encouraged, and I don't feel like the Conservative government are actually really encouraging people, and it's particularly younger people. There's plenty of opportunities. I get off my own back and do a lot of things, and I feel like we should be encouraging self-employment and small businesses more.
Look, Steve, I'll come back to you. Theo, I mean, if we can talk about self-employment, obviously you were an entrepreneur from the get-go. But you know, hearing from Neve there, I mean, there's a whole swathe of people who are thinking, what are my job prospects going to be? If we're facing possibly the worst recession since the Second World War, if not much further back than that, it looks pretty bleak.
Fiona, I couldn't put it better myself. It's going to be tough. Unemployment's going to rise. The job market is going to be incredibly difficult. Youngsters are going to face a tsunami of job losses. And this is one of the few times I'm going to say this, because I've always believed in a very free economy and non-discrimination, but we need to start looking at some very positive discrimination where we can actually address the issues of people of a certain age with support to employers to make sure we encourage that. I think we need to really understand that.
What, you mean encourage young people in and older people out?
Well, no, not at all. We're now bad news. No, my first job. So I left school at 16, very little qualifications, dyslexic, sent something like 100 applications out and got like 100 rejections. Mind you, my applications wouldn't have been a good reading with my spelling. But actually, the only reason I got a job, my first job, was because at the time the government were giving allowances to businesses. I think it was about 1,500 quid a year. It wasn't a lot of money, but to take on somebody of a certain age who hadn't had a job before. And so they took me on when they were really not sure that they should actually be spending 1,500 quid. But the fact was, it was subsidised. And that gave me my first job and my first opportunity. And then I could move on from there. So we need initiatives like that that are going to... Because the measures that the Chancellor's put in were required, but it was a blunt instrument, blunderbuss approach that had to be done very quickly. And I'm afraid some people went through the net. Now we need to focus a lot more and deal with category by category, industry by industry, age by age, requirement by requirement. It's hard work, and you can't just make... no disrespect to our politicians, Stephen, but the fact is, you know, the present government do like to make big announcements for PR purposes, and we just need to do the graft and the work first and actually accept that sometimes it's going to be difficult and sometimes you're going to say things that are not popular, but you just want to be respected, not liked all the time, and we must stop this wanting to be liked by the public. Let's get honest with them, tell them how it's going to be, and actually then address the difficult issues that are going to be difficult, but if you show you're working at it, people will work with you on it.
George?
I express support for much of what Theo just said and much of what the panellists said. I do think self-employment, entrepreneurship is going to be necessary moving forward as so much of our industry transforms. We're dealing with a new society. We go through it every time we see someone, we think we're going to shake hands or embrace. We don't do these things anymore. There's so much that we don't do anymore. Look at the shape of this show. So now is the time for us to get creative about how we, as the incoming generation into the workforce, are going to reshape the economy.
There's lots of hands up. I'm going to come to some of you in a moment, but Jess?
I agree almost entirely with what Theo said, in that the government needs to act now to stimulate the jobs for younger people going forward. They are going to be a lost generation. And let's face it, the young people today, people who are under 30 today, have pretty much lived their entire economic lives since the 2008 downturn and have had to tighten their belts and have lost out on things that were there certainly when I was younger. And the reality is that the government needs to already have announced what it's going to do to help businesses get young people into training, into schemes. Like Theo said, there can be different sectors, there can be different standards, and it needs to be responsive to what is actually happening out there. Because without it, we're just going to end up with a generation lost. And even in the announcements last week with regard to the tutoring that school children will now get, a very welcome announcement. But an hour before the announcement was made, those aged 16 to 18 were taken out of it. And these are the people who we are going to need to help, who have already lost all their youth services, had their schools cut for the entire time that they might have been there. Now is the time to step up, like Germany has already announced stimulus packages, and say, what are we going to do to create jobs and training and encourage businesses to take these people on? Because these are our children.
Suresh?
If I can just...
Iona, sorry, yes.
Say that, yes, I would say that Jess is absolutely right to say that colleges that help 16 to 19-year-olds should be included in the COVID catch-up fund, and that actually spending that little bit more time in education could make all the difference. So if we had targeted funding for booster courses that just allowed young people to build up their skills, both hard and soft, before they go into the labour market, that could make all the difference between them being employable and an attractive worker and being on the job scrap heap. But I also think that this issue is too important to descend into party politics. And we've been hearing for a long time about the need for a commission on social care, because understandably, that's going to be extremely important to address after this crisis. But I wonder whether we also need a commission on young people's opportunities and jobs, for the parties to work together and to agree that this should be a priority. And debate the details by all means, but for us to try and transcend that party politics and come together.
So, Steve, lots of ideas being thrown in your direction. Targeted jobs for young people. Iona's talking about a commission. More emphasis on entrepreneurship from Kirsty.
Well, on the one hand, move quicker, and the other, have a commission to talk about it more. I mean, well, I can reassure Theo, there's no shortage of graft in the Treasury, and officials, if you look at the schemes they put in place at speed, like the furlough, the self-employment, the grants, and so forth, have covered a lot to protect jobs. But I absolutely agree that then the next phase to that is how then, for those jobs we're not able to protect, and the Chancellor's been very candid, we can't protect every job. There will be changes, and as the questioner picked up, there are changes in the way people are working, the use of online. If you look at GPs, only 3% of GPs were using online GP surgeries before the pandemic. Now it's up to 99%, so pretty much all. So there are changes to how people are operating online. That will change the workplace, and we're in very active discussions with employers, particularly small and medium employers, to see what schemes we can put in place to support them. But the first priority was protect as many jobs as possible. Over 9 million have been through the furlough scheme, but we then need to look at the next phase, which is how, particularly on things like apprenticeships, we get the right skills, working with the National Citizens Service as well, get the right careers advice, the right skills, the right training for people moving forward.
Well, look,
Sorry, can I just jump in? I really want to commend the Treasury for stepping in and providing so much support under the furlough arrangements. You mentioned the idea of a commission for young people being kind of talk about it more, but I think there's something more to be said about focusing on the opportunities and the challenges that will be faced by this generation and getting some significant indication of government commitment to this issue. There are a number of issues, especially when we talk about housing, is a common concern across this generation, in which the government has made a lot of the right noises and talked about commitments that it's going to make, not necessarily this government, but this generation of Conservative government. And we retroactively find out that what's been happening behind the scenes, when there are no eyes on the process, is flies in the face of the sounds that you've been making. Specifically, what prompted me to say that was the recent revelations about the Robert Jenrick situation, the housing minister that's come under fire for signing off on a development, £1 billion development that looks to undermine the provision of social housing in the community that this thing is planned in. So I guess as a generation, we sometimes question the sincerity with which you engage the challenges of our age group and vulnerable communities.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.